Chapter 2, Literature Review. Multiple intelligences. First criticism of multiple intelligences. Since the inception of multiple intelligences, there have been a broad general criticism of the theory. Much of the criticism that multiple intelligences have received is dated back to the early 1900s before Gardner developed the theory. One criticism of multiple intelligences was that there was not enough research on the effectiveness of multiple intelligences since there was no empirical support from the testing community. In contrast, the majority of teachers and administrators that have used Gardner's multiple intelligences were more familiar with the positive effects of multiple intelligences that were used to engage students and comprehend knowledge. Critics believe that there were only one overarching intelligence referred to Spearman's G, or the G factor. The G factor was developed during the early 1900s and believed that individuals who took one cognitive test would receive the same score on another cognitive test. The G factor was discovered by the first cognitive testers who found that people who scored well on one type of cognitive test tended to score well on all of them. Regardless of the contents, words, numbers, pictures, shapes, how they are administered, individually or in groups, orally, in writing, or pantomimed, or what they intended to measure, vocabulary, mathematical reasoning, spatial ability, all cognitive tests measure mostly the same thing. A second criticism of multiple intelligences. Another criticism that multiple intelligences has received was a debate about semantics and Gardner's use of the word intelligence. Critics believe that what Gardner was referring to as intelligences should instead be referred to as capacities or human cognitive abilities. The second part of this criticism was that these intelligences were secondary or even tertiary to the G factor. There was never a debate about whether the multiple intelligences existed or if the G factor existed. Instead, Gardner acknowledged that the G factor existed as the logical, mathematical intelligence. However, Gardner recognized in his theory that logical mathematical intelligence was equally important to the 7 other intelligences as well. For Gardner to classify a type of intelligence, the intelligence had to be able to produce empirical data based on the following 8-part criteria. The first part of the criteria was potential isolation by brain damage. For the first part of the criteria, Gardner observed intelligences that people continued to have at the Boston Veterans Administrations. For some of these patients, they had difficulty with reading and or writing after an illness or accident, but were still able to sing, dance, or do math. The second part of the criteria is the existence of savants, prodigies, and other exceptional individuals. The second part refers to individuals who have had unique abilities computing mathematical equations or having the ability to play a composition after only hearing it for the first time. Gardner's third part of the criteria is a distinctive developmental history and a defined set of expert end-state performances. The third state refers to when individuals begin to develop their intelligence. The third criterion was based on Gardner's ability to identify individuals who have reached the end state of intelligences. Noam Chomsky and Lev Vygotsky would be examples of the end state of linguistic intelligence. Mozart or Beethoven would be examples of the end state of musical intelligence. The fourth part of Gardner's criterion is evolutionary history and evolutionary plausibility. The early cave paintings in Lascaux, France, are evidence of how human beings have evolved to today's visual intelligence through user experiences on mobile devices and the internet. The support from psychometric findings is the fifth part of the criteria. The fifth part of the criteria requires that the intelligences that Gardner identified can be measured through assessments. For example, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children assessed verbal intelligence through vocabulary, visual intelligence through picture arrangement, and bodily-kinesthetic intelligence through coordination and object assembly. The sixth part of the criteria recognizes that support from experimental psychological tasks require that each intelligence can be isolated and identified from one another. The sixth part of the criteria identifies how some individuals have superior memories, perceptions, and attention. These individuals can demonstrate different levels of proficiencies based on individual intelligences. An identifiable core operation or set of operations is the seventh part of the criteria. An example of a core operation is how musical intelligence includes sensitivity to pitch or rhythm. A core operation can be how an intelligence depends on a type of precision to perform the kind of intelligence. The eighth and final part of the criteria is susceptibility to encoding in a symbol system. An intelligence must be able to develop its symbol or notational systems to meet the last part of the criteria. For example, designers, architects, and engineers rely on visual intelligence for the graphical languages that they use. Critics of multiple intelligences rely on instruments that measure intelligence through the use of numbers and standardized testing. The tools that critics use are similar to the same standardized testing that is used to measure and assess student intelligence. Critics of multiple intelligence measure school-like thinking by relying purely on G-factor intelligence. Gardner used several empirical studies from fields including anthropology, biology, neurology, psychology, sociology, and the arts and humanities. Third criticism of multiple intelligences. The third criticism is that there are no practical uses for students to use multiple intelligences in school. This criticism is self-deprecating of the current education school system itself. The critics of this claim believe that all students think the same and therefore should be taught the same. For these critics, multiple intelligences are not relevant to the school system because critics believe that all students learn the same. This is not a criticism of multiple intelligences as the researchers intended, but instead a criticism with the way that educators failed to design the school system to meet the needs of students. If multiple intelligences do not apply to the K-12 school system, this does not mean that multiple intelligences are not applicable to future careers or higher education. This criticism is only an admission that critics believe that students do not need multiple intelligences for standardized testing. Gardner developed his theory of multiple intelligences in 1983. Critics adopted the criticism of multiple intelligences during the Reagan presidential administration, which began to cut funding to art classes and implement standardized testing. Critics of multiple intelligences favored quantitative data as valid research. The critics of multiple intelligences tend to be critics of qualitative forms of data collections as they reduce students to numbers through quantitative data. Critics of multiple intelligences do not consider the experiences of students when analyzing data. By 2001, the No Child Left Behind law was implemented and left no flexibility for controlled studies to exist in experimental classrooms. With the implementation of No Child Left Behind and its ties to school funding and low socioeconomic communities, there have been little to no studies that constitute valid research in the United States. Schools in low socioeconomic communities would otherwise risk losing their funding if the school chose not to include state standards. Multiple intelligence studies conducted in the United States do not exist because there is not a singular way to incorporate multiple intelligences. Multiple intelligences are not a single teaching strategy, but instead a range of strategies, techniques, attitudes, tools, and methods for teachers to incorporate. Integrating multiple intelligences at one school with limited resources will be different at another school with various resources. What might be relevant to learn at one school for a group of students might not be relevant to another group of students at a different school. Universities have worked with educators, administrators, and students around the world to research the positive effects of multiple intelligences. In 2004, Columbia University honored multiple intelligence researchers and theoreticians with the prestigious Teachers College record. In separate research, Harvard University studied cognitive and the arts in different ways, including multiple intelligences in a program referred to as Project Zero. Project Zero has worked with practitioners in the United States and around the world. Conventionally, researchers believe that thinking is a result of learning in a linear directional way. Project Zero has recognized that learning is a positive outcome of thinking that occurs interchangeably back and forth between learning and thinking. Researchers should not reduce the effectiveness of multiple intelligences to the success or failure of a student on high-stakes testing. Standardized testing does not measure a student's engagement, progress, perception toward school, problem-solving, and documentation of the learning process to projects and portfolios. Improvements in all of these factors are not taken into consideration by researchers in the G factor. Fourth criticism of multiple intelligences. The fourth criticism is that multiple intelligences dumbs down the curriculum to make all students mistakenly believe that they are smart. This criticism claims that multiple intelligences are used by educators to simplify learning to create the perception that all students are learning. The other part of this criticism is that learning cannot be rigorous if students are using their strongest intelligence to learn a given topic. The response to this criticism comes from academics and journalists who are far removed from the classroom. These critics believe that lectures, textbooks, and standardized testing are enough. Students are expected, by researchers, to learn one content area without being able to connect it to another content area. Educators who incorporate multiple intelligences in their classroom understand that content areas should be taught simultaneously for learning to occur by students. These educators use multiple intelligences to engage the complete selves of the students and see the difference that it makes in the lives of the students. Fifth criticism of multiple intelligences. The fifth criticism of multiple intelligences is that humans only use 10% of their brains to read, write, speak, and do math. The myth that humans use only 10% of the brain has been perpetuated and popularized by celebrated scientists such as Albert Einstein and Professor William James of Harvard. When scientists believe that humans use just 10% of the brain, then qualified scientists such as Albert Einstein should have been encouraged to explore the intelligence attributed to the other 90% of the brain. If the 10% myth were true, that would be enough evidence of how much of these scientists did not know about the brain and would highlight what the scientists left unexplored. These same critics believe that individuals are just left brain or right brain thinkers. Intelligence was thought by researchers to be as simple as reading, writing, speaking, and math. Instead, the myth was a misunderstanding of neurological research that discovered the brain consisted mainly of glial cells, which has a minor function in the brain. The brain activated much of the research that the critics conducted and focused primarily on local neurons, with the small parts of the brain that are activated at a given time. Criticism of multiple intelligences grew at the same time as the argument that art education is not a priority for students in general education. There was never any legitimate criticisms of multiple intelligences. Instead, the criticism served as evidence of how little researchers knew about the brain. The lack of research led to myths about art education, the implementation of standardized testing, and the prioritization of specific content areas. Outdated myths have continued to have their lasting effects on the core content that is prioritized. Today, general education compartmentalizes core content into separate courses based on the misconception of the research conducted during this time. By having different core content such as math and English is acknowledging that there are different intelligences. Separating these two core contents is also limiting students' knowledge. If knowledge remained compartmentalized, then innovation would be unlikely to occur. Innovation occurs at the intersections and connections where these different content areas meet. For example, formulas from math need to be combined by a scientist with a design from art for engineering a new invention. Examples of teaching strategies can exist as differentiation and accommodating lessons for students. When students do not have accommodations, differentiation, or choice, students will likely not be engaged in an assignment. When students' physical or cognitive abilities are not met, this can lead to students being placed in track and English learning courses, intermediate math, or special needs classes. For example, if a student has developed their skills more verbally, but is required to do every assignment in language arts by reading and writing, then this student would be likely to fail the class. By not acknowledging the benefits of multiple intelligences, researchers are implying that since all students learn the same way, learn the same information, then as a result, these students can be taught the same way. By acknowledging the benefits of multiple intelligences, all students have equitable opportunities to achieve higher levels of learning through creative learning principles. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And feel free to watch any of the other related videos.